West Africa viewers, and welcome to this Coffee with the Editor, sponsored by Gibela. I'm going to be chatting to the CEO, Reggie, and we're going to be talking about how Gibela Rail is going to be meeting the needs of passenger rail on the African continent going into the future. Reggie, thank you so much for joining me. And how's the performance going so far? Well,
look, we've got some headwinds like any other company with all the things that are happening geopolitically affecting our supply chain. But generally, operationally, we're doing really well. So we've just closed our financial year and we're looking good.
I'm pleased to hear that, because also it's quite exciting. You're almost at that halfway mark.
Yes, indeed. We've just delivered train set 280. So we're very close to our 300 mark, and hopefully by December we would have hit that. And it's a milestone in itself if you look back to where we come from. It is a huge achievement that we're very proud of.
With you being at the halfway mark now, you're obviously thinking about the future. And the future of Gibela, the future of your products, and obviously the opportunities that are going to come up in Africa. What is your strategy?
Looking out to what we can do beyond this, our plan is to go into the continent and become a big player in the connection of the continent. The theme of this conference is about a connected continent, and we think there's a big part for a company like Gibela, with a state-of-the-art plant, young people that can go in for generations, and very capable people. At our current production rate, which is one of the fastest in the world, but the quality of the product that we give, we are convinced that if we take that to the continent, we will be a big part of that solution.
So the train that you guys are currently manufacturing and supplying into South Africa is the Alstom Extropolis train. So obviously when that train set contract comes to an end, are you going to look at a different type of train to take into Africa, or will it be the same?
Well, it's typically informed by two things. One will be where technology is, because we are continuously following where the market is going in terms of new products that we can bring in. Secondly, it will be informed by the specifications by each of the customers that we'll be interfacing with. But how our plant is structured is that it gives us the flexibility to respond to either. Of course, we'll be going out to the customers to say, this is a proven product with these developments, but if they've got specific needs, we'll make those possible for them.
And you've obviously calculated, what that requirement in Africa is going to be. I mean, you've done the business case for it?
Well, business case is in progress, but I think just listening to the discussions around more than 26,000 new rail infrastructure in kilometers that will be put in place, both for goods and for passengers, for us it tells us that the market is significant, and we will explore that market with the best capability that we have on the continent.
The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, AfCFTA, that in itself also presents quite a lot of opportunity in driving the strategy of the movement of people and goods.
Absolutely. I think that for us is the main gateway into Africa. When we look into the continent, you will not find a similar facility than the one we have. And we think it's more efficient for other countries to utilize this facility. In the rail industry, when you have a facility that's 15, 20 years old, it's relatively new. And this is one with the state-of-the-art equipment that will take us longer and into the future, that we think it's more efficient to utilize it for the betterment of the entire continent than to replicate similar plants everywhere else. Of course, to the extent that the capacity is available.
Are you going to stick to just looking at passenger rail, or are you going to kind of jump onto the rail reform that we're seeing now in terms of the freight side as well?
Our current focus is on passenger rail, and we think it's a niche market itself. From an economic perspective, moving people with a train is by far the most efficient way to move them. Instead of having 20 buses that move people, we can deploy one train, and that's quite efficient. But also it's got spin-offs on the infrastructure on the roads. We remove a lot of buses from the road, but move people quicker and more efficient across the continent. And we think that is the way to go. So we want to remain in the passenger rail industry as a manufacturer. We think we understand that. We've also quite ramped up our facilities to maintain these trains. For instance, in South Africa, we now operate fully in 4 depots where the customer is operating. And that helps the customer to provide a high level of service which gives people hope and dignity, and that's how we'd like to see our business.
We also need to look at how we package passenger rail as a service to the governments around Africa, because it's not profit making. It's definitely a service to the people.
We would like to phrase it differently. We not say that it's loss making. We say that it is sustainable. And sustainability means even at the level where the subsidies are required, they should be sustainable and not have lots of leakages in the system. And one way of doing that, or certainly our contribution could be where we advise in terms of what product to use, how it should be used, the kind of depots that they can set up, how to maintain it. And that whole package should make for a sustainable passenger rail service throughout the continent. So we really believe that sustainable subsidies will always be required, but they should remain sustainable as well.
Entrenched in what you guys do at Gibela, from a skills development, your people development.
We may have a template in Gibela of how similar projects need to be done in the continent. So touching on the issue of unemployment, but more specifically about the youth, this is the youngest continent in the world, as we know. So if we can show that we've got a proven method of using young people in the rail industry, developing them and making them run a world-class African facility like the one we have, it certainly is possible everywhere else, and it will answer a lot of questions from an unemployment, but from a skilling perspective, and for the long term, it's more important. As you know, largely in the rail industry, you'll find a lot of older people in older facilities, and we're trying to say it is possible, actually, with the right training, with the right capacitation, that young people can also get to the same level. Then you have the skills for a much longer period in the industry, and we think that's a template we can take to the continent.
What happens after you've made a train and you've given it to your customer? You are a full service facility, so you make the train and then you look after it.
That's correct. So we work alongside with the customer at the depots. We have a clear role to look after the train. The idea is that the product is there, but the product should always be available. So we've got a clear target of making trains available for service with the customer. We also have a repair center now that we, instead of taking the components and selling them out to OEMs, we now have arrangement with OEMs that we can repair and overhaul some of these internally. That's a new skill that we are also bringing into the industry, and making sure that our turnaround times in getting those trains to keep running is shortened a lot, instead of sending everything offshore for repairs.
So how do customers engage with you now going forward?
Well, they engage with us to first give us an idea of what their needs look like, because that informs what we should be preparing for them. And secondly is the timelines. That is one of the things that we find is quite difficult to get out of the potential customers. Those timelines will inform our design timelines, will inform our factory adjustments where we require them. More importantly, it will also inform how ready we should be to get into that. One of the key problems or challenge, I think, across the world, but I would like to say in the rail space, is that product specification design, those can be addressed, but the funding element remains a big question mark.
Have you got connections in the funding environments? Have you managed to be able to secure, like, from conception through to financing to execution? Are you able to do that?
That is the exercise we're going through. So from our capabilities, we would not be able to provide funding, but as a solution with other partners, we certainly could. You know, the financial institutions, we could discuss with them. But coming to the question of profitability, when I said the subsidy or the support should be sustainable, it is also to give some certain level of certainty to the funders to know what to expect from the operations. Therefore, your operations cannot be making erratic losses all the time. It has to be sustainable. So it has to be run like a business, and a business that will make money, but perhaps not enough money to cover everything, and therefore the subsidy is sustainable. So we're talking to partners, looking at those. We are also exploring options of leasing models where we would be able to build a train and be able to lease it out as opposed to sell it out outright. And those are still in their infancy stages, but we do see those as some instruments that need to be taken into account to intervene in connecting the continent.
So another thing about the continent is, we've got different gauges, and we also have different needs. So, like, yes, we've got electrified lines here in South Africa, but we don't necessarily have electrified lines, in the whole of Africa or necessarily on Cape Gauge. It's not all electrified. In your strategy, have you taken that into account? Have you got a modification on your product to enable being able to work in non-electrified or acid gauge networks?
Yes, certainly that's part of the strategy. As you rightfully point out, electrification is not common across the continent, and therefore that requires us to look at some hybrid models that we can bring into our train. We could bring diesel with electricity for future development, whether when they get electricity, it will be able to work. We could look at other options like battery, and those other options we've been looking at with our engineering team to consider what is the optimal, when to take it to market, but it also requires input from customers to say, this is when it will be required, then we can look forward into the market and say what will be available then. But diesel is obviously an option. It is just we need to be considerate of the use of diesel given the climate change and environmental aspects, and this is why hybrid becomes a go-to type of model. So we are looking at those options. Gibela is open for business. We are a company of the future. What we've been able to do from a transformational perspective is something that hasn't been seen before. Our local content has shot up quite significantly, above 70%. And to date, I'm proud to say we have spent more than 23 billion rand on local companies. And that is part of taking our entire ecosystem with us. We look after our communities, we look after our suppliers, and we look after everyone around us, our employees, of course, with the development and how we look after them as employees of the company. So we're very happy. We think we're in a good space, and it's time to launch ourselves thoroughly in the continent.